Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our conversations with Gibran the Prophet. We are in the very middle. This is lecture number 15 of 30 proposed talks on Gibran's Prophet on freedom. We are, if you'll think about it then, halfway through the text. And it's important, I think, to recognize the potentiality, at least, of these trinities that happen within this text. We've been commenting on that this is the third of a group of poems that starts with crime and punishment, goes to laws, and now it kind of naturally, I think, leads us to this question about freedom. The tension between don't tell me what to do, that very Promethean idea, and the need for social order and therefore the need for laws and the like. How do you balance those two things, as we said earlier, this notion of power versus human dignity? Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, you'll find our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already been exposed to all of our previous lectures, especially that intro set of comments, and then all the way up through lecture 14 on laws. Now, as background information here, I just want to point out that it's clear that Gibran was very influenced by his reading and study of Lao Tzu's the Tao Te Ching. The yin-yang symbol is always going to kind of represent so much of Taoist thought in this regards. And the idea that, like Blake's Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience, we've given quite a few lectures of that on learnstrong.net as well. This idea of the power of paradoxes, the way in which desire for freedom, that is to say freedom especially from pain and suffering, can be a trap unto itself, which will take us back to his own houses and the whole notion of technology and the difficulties of allowing those technologies into our life, first as a guest, but ultimately beyond a host to being a master. There's going to be a lot of Plato's Republic 7 again here. The power of the imagery of the sun we're going to pay attention to. And you'll remember what Marcus Aurelius said in his Meditations, that even an emperor can be a good person, even in spite of the fact that he's living in a palace. The question of freedom versus discipline is going to be central as well. The notion that true freedom is really, in the end, a product of the soul. Notice we're going to start with an orator. That is to say, somebody who plays with words. So that's significant because that takes us back to the Socratic tradition and, of course, the sophists and all of that. And an orator said, "Speak to us of freedom." And he answered, "At the city gate and by your fireside, I've seen you prostrate yourself and worship your own freedom, even as slaves humble themselves before a tyrant and praise him, though he slays them." It's a fascinating word picture that he would pick slaves. The idea that slaves have no real choice. To what degree are we kind of encapsulated in a certain type of bondage? I'm thinking, of course, of the great Frederick Douglass, who made that observation that the true bondage is, of course, a lack of education. And here, certainly, Gibran will play the same game. "I, in the grove of the temple," and remember, of course, they're in front of a temple as Al-Mustafa is giving this presentation. "I, in the grove of the temple, and in the shadow of the citadel, I've seen the freest among you wear their freedom as a yoke and a handcuff, and my heart bled within me." So again, strong language, right? My heart bled within me. "For you can only be free when even the desire of seeking freedom becomes a harness to you, and when you cease to speak of freedom as a goal and a fulfillment. You shall be free indeed when your days are not without care, nor your nights without a want and a grief, but rather when these things girdle," notice earlier it was harness, now it's girdle your life, and yet you rise above them, naked and unbound. Now this, of course, begins to join all kinds of ontological understandings with the question of theodicy and pain and suffering. What does it mean to be free? Well, we'll never in our human existence be free from pain and suffering. This is his point. And if you spend all your life trying to somehow escape those, then you are in fact a slave to whatever it is. Your desire, your passions for luxury, of course, the longing to escape all of life is an addiction to itself. This is what he means. The longing for freedom, constantly longing for freedom, belies the very idea that you're no longer asking, why did this happen for me? You're asking, why did this happen to me? Which, as we pointed out already, is a theodictic question which will never get a good answer, why this happened to me. But to say, why did this happen for me, gives you at least an approach to freedom. You are no longer a victim in this world that you live in where all this bad stuff is constantly happening to you. And now he moves from this word picture of slavery to now talk about breaking the chains. And this idea, you're as free as you allow yourself to be. And how shall you rise? Again, notice the power of the rhetorical questions. There have been some readers, certainly I'm hopeful that you'll be one of them, who just takes a red ink pen and goes through the entire book of poems of the prophet and just circles all the question marks, just to be blown away by how many there actually are here. And how shall you rise beyond your days and nights unless you break the chains which you at the dawn of your understanding have fastened around your noon hour? In other words, the greatest lack of freedom is because we put ourselves inside of cages. Obviously, cages of thought and the like. Think about the power of Republic 7 in the cave allegory, sitting in that dark cave chained up, looking at shadows on a wall, believing them to be real. In truth, that which you call freedom is the strongest of these chains, though its links glitter in the sun and dazzle your eyes. Again, the challenge for Plato, as we've commented on, is perspicacity, insight, understanding, right? And what is it but fragments of your own self you would discard that you may become free? It's a brilliant psychological insight. We somehow think that we can leave who we are. Of course, the only problem with that is everywhere you go, there you are, right? We got to deal with ourself itself. We can't imagine that somehow we can escape ourselves. If it is an unjust law you would abolish, now this is brilliant stuff for all of us who are interested in making sure that justice is provided to everyone. Watch this. If it is an unjust law you would abolish, that law was written with your own hand upon your own forehead. You cannot erase it by burning your law books, nor by washing the foreheads of your judges, though you pour the sea upon them. It's obviously his irony is wonderful here, right? Hyperbole playing with it. And if it is a despot you would dethrone, certainly, of course, all of us interested in justice would say that's what we want, despot to dethrone. See first that his throne erected within you is destroyed. And how can a tyrant rule the free and the proud, but for a tyranny in their own freedom and a shame in their own pride? The first step in all social justice movements. Go back to Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. You'll remember that he talks about this. Before we can challenge the oppressor, we ourselves must prove to ourselves worthy of that challenge. In other words, we have to live good lives, we have to live pure lives. We ourselves have to live just lives if we are demanding justice. It's a brilliant insight, and certainly, of course, it's heavy words. I mean, this is hard business. I can always see something wrong with you and challenge whatever is wrong in you. The question is, have I looked within myself to see that I myself am a tyrant? I myself can be a despot before I ever start attacking other tyrants and despots. And if it is a care you would cast off, that care has been chosen by you rather than imposed upon you. Very much like the Crime and Punishment poem, obviously. And if it is a fear you would dispel, the seed of that fear is in your heart and not in the hand of the feared. Wow. Brilliant insight. I mean, this is, you'll remember in our study of Plato's Crito, there's poor Socrates sitting in jail. Crito comes to him and says, come on, we're going to get you out. And it's Socrates who says, wait, we got to think about this. And Crito's like, no, we don't have to think about this. We're getting you out. Let's go. And it will be Socrates who challenges Crito that the true criminal, the true slave, the true bond person caught in bonds is the one who doesn't think. And therefore, if I were to walk out of this jail, he says to Crito, I would be a criminal at that point, and then I am guilty. Now I'm not guilty. I'm innocent now. But if I do what you're telling me to do, now all of a sudden I've defied the law of the state, and is that good or is that bad? Do you want to live in a state where everybody defies the laws? And of course, poor Crito is like, okay, fine, let's have that conversation. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant insight. To finish this poem, verily, all things, notice the word all, move within your being. And again, this will sound very much like the Taoist ideas. Verily, all things move within your being in constant half embrace. Think about the yin-yang symbol. I mean, if you're annotating your own volume, just draw the yin-yang symbol right there. Notice we got light, we got dark, but within the dark there's some light. Within the light there's some dark, right? That's that yin-yang symbol. Verily, all things move within your being in constant half embrace. The desired and the dreaded. The repugnant and the cherished. The pursued and that which you would escape. These things move within you as lights and shadows in pairs that cling. It's a brilliant, I mean, as I've already said to you guys several times, I mean, those of us who write poetry would long to write just one good line of poetry like this. And he's got so many of these lines in the prophet. Take a look at it again. He says, these things move within you as lights and shadows. You're obviously thinking of Republic 7. In pairs that cling. And when the shadow fades and is no more, the light that lingers becomes a shadow to another light. And thus, your freedom, when it looses its fetters, becomes itself the fetter of a greater freedom. It's almost as if he's playing around with the Hegelian idea of thesis, antithesis, somehow dialectically forcing the synthesis, which in turn immediately becomes the new thesis, which obviously needs its opposite. And that's what Hegel said is the way we read history. Of course, Marx would have his views of this as well from an economics perspective. From a spiritual perspective, Gibran says, it's an interesting idea all the way through. Well, what are we going to do with a passage like this? At 2a, well, I think he is making the argument that real freedom is in the soul. We're only as free as we allow ourselves to be. At 2b, notice all the rhetorical questions that are here and the paradoxes. It's quite compelling. At 3a, well, I mentioned the Tao Te Ching. You'll remember that in the passage 29, a translation that reads like this, do you want to improve the world? I don't think it can be done. The world is sacred. It can't be improved. Now, obviously the question is, what does Lao Tzu mean when he talks about the world? And I think that Gibran would, he would say, well, no, there are moments when we have to stand up and fight against injustice. Certainly Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail is a classic example of this. But again, to go back to MLK at 3a, before, he says in that classic text, before we act, we have to ask ourselves, are we worthy to demand freedom? Have we proved it to ourselves through renunciation, through discipline, and the like? Finally at 3b, well, to take not just this passage, but the previous two as well, as that Trinity I was suggesting to you, what are your thoughts on this? This is some heavy words, as he will qualify it in the last poem. Do you agree with this view? Do you not? What about justice movements and movements towards greater freedom? Must they all start with us being just within ourselves? Do you agree with that idea? Can we hold others to a goal that we ourselves are unwilling to live up to? Or in the moment that we demand that of others, we are placing ourselves in a certain kind of prison cell, a bondage of a kind. Fascinating idea. Well, from this trinity of crime and punishment, laws and freedom, we'll now move to another trinity, I believe, in reason, passion, pain, and self-knowledge. And we'll find the way in which Gibran is dancing with these heavy words, but he does it so unbelievably lightly that I think for most of us, we have to smile as we cry. Thank you.